And good afternoon, everybody. Steve Schmidt with The Warning. Also, the Save America movement. Pleased to be joined by Maritsa Georgiou of the Out of the Grounded podcast and reporting from Social Circle, Georgia, outside of Atlanta this morning. Maritsa, how are you?
Hey Steve, I'm doing okay. It's strange to be in Social Circle, Georgia right now. I'll tell you that.
So, Social Circle, Georgia is a town of 5,000 people, not far from Atlanta. And Social Circle is one of the towns that has been designated to become a prison town in the MAGA Gulag archipelago. Behind you is a warehouse facility that, if Homeland Security is able to fulfill its plans, is soon going to be a massive immigration prison. What I think is fair to call a concentration camp. You walked right into that empty warehouse. You've been talking to people around the town about it. And one of the reasons that we have this collaboration is that so nobody in America will ever be able to say they didn't know. They had no idea about. So, Maritza, what are you standing in front of? Tell us about your trip to Social Circle, Georgia, and what you.
Yeah, Steve. Okay, so behind me is that warehouse. It's more than 1 million square feet. And I just got done with an interview with the city manager here in Social Circle, Georgia. So a lot of the information about what's going on here behind me didn't come to light until a couple of weeks ago. The city manager first heard a rumor about this the day after Christmas, that ICE was going to buy up this facility, DHS was going to buy this facility and turn it into an immigration detention center. I think that it's fair to say that everybody in Social Circle certainly knows about this now. There's been a lot of people really galvanizing around this and united against this for lots of different reasons. What's interesting to me, though, is you go 15 minutes down the road to Covington, Georgia, very cute little touristy town, a lot of film and TV shows shot there. And some of the people who live in Covington didn't even know Social Circle was a town in Georgia, much less hearing about this. So it's been a really interesting trip because we've been doing a lot of educating, just telling people why we're here, what we're learning, what we're reporting on. The really interesting thing to me about this is that right before we got here, I spoke to somebody with really deep knowledge about real estate transactions within the federal government, because as it's been reported extensively, the federal government, DHS, purchased this property behind me for $128.6 million, almost 5 times what its assessed value is at. The last owner purchased this facility for like $28 million just a couple of years ago. What we learned about that today is that ownership group, PNK Group, which was originally founded in Russia, that ownership group purchased this after all of the plans had been approved for this warehouse. It was sold to city officials and the planning officials as, it's going to be some kind of distribution warehouse, like a Walmart distribution center or an Amazon distribution center. This was approved several years ago, and we still had a lot of chain disruptions. And so supply chain disruptions. And so they fulfilled this. Across the street from me, you can't see it, but I'm looking at a dart distribution center. And so what they do over here is it's like paper goods, solo cups, that kind of thing, containers. So there's a lot of that here. There's a General Mills distribution center down the road. There's a lot of that here. So this was approved to be some kind of distribution center. There are 140 loading dock doors. And this was never intended to be any kind of holding facility for people. And here's the deal. none of the rules. I asked if there was a certificate of occupancy issue that they could hold up. I asked if there were, there are lots of issues with the wastewater plans, with the water plans, water and sewage. This town is already at capacity. This town of 5,000 people is already at capacity. DHS wants to put up to 10,000 detainees in here, tripling the town's population overnight, not to mention 2,000 to 2,500 employees who would work here. So they say that logistically, it just doesn't work. It's just not going to work. But then, you ask about these questions. Well, is there anything you can do? The city manager basically said, short of Congress doing something, there's nothing they can do because the federal government doesn't have to adhere to any of these local rules. On top of this building, they won't get any tax revenue from it now.
Talk about the Russian ownership of the company that was paid a amount of money that's 5 times the assessed value of the property. Do we know anything about that?
It's very secretive. I asked the city manager about that. He said he really doesn't know much because, they originally approved plans for a totally different company. They approved plans to build this warehouse and this site, this purchase for a totally different company, and then P&K came in and bought it up. You go to their website, you see dozens of other warehouse facilities like this across the United States for sale. It's been reported that the owner has homes in New York and Moscow and Monaco, but the person that the city manager deals with is not that person. It's a different guy that he's been dealing with. So there is just so much, everyone is so in the dark about what's been going on. And what the city manager said to me is basically, it's shocking that the federal government never made contact with the city. Never made contact with local officials. They had to go digging for the information. They reached out to their members of Congress, Senators Warnock, Senator Warnock and Ossoff, and Representative Mike Collins, who represents this district. They all had to dig information up. The city manager said Representative Collins didn't know about this when he first called. Since then, Representative Collins has said, while he supports the president's agenda, his immigration agenda, he doesn't think this is the right spot for this detention facility. But the city manager said, short of Congress stepping in, that there seems to be nothing they can do. And I would describe his attitude, he seemed so defeated. And he said he's just taking this day at a time because they just are trying to figure out any way to stop this. Here's the other shocking thing, Steve. You think about this facility, right? Like I went up, I couldn't go in it, but I looked in the windows. It is a complete shell. There is nothing finished in here. It's just structural beams, and it's completely wide open. And so the federal government released some kind of very nondescript blueprints, I'll say, about what this might look like. And the city manager said they're moving in some modular units similar to what we saw down in Florida. But the deal is this: they're going to get a construction bid awarded probably in the next couple of days to build this out. And once that's awarded, they say that it'll only take 60 to 75 days to complete. Over 1 million square feet. Try doing a kitchen remodel in that amount of time. I don't know how that's going to happen. And then there are all these concerns, again, about wastewater and the effluent discharge and where that's going to go. And I asked the city manager pretty directly, what does that actually look like? If they start doing this, and they just kind of come in and do whatever they want here, what does that look like? And he said, well, we're going to see backups and overflows, and it's not going to be pretty. So a lot of people just saying, how is this possible? But again, short of Congress stepping in, there are not a lot of avenues. However, he says they are looking at every avenue possible, but it's just so unclear as to whether anything can be done right now, especially with that short timeline. They want to start moving people in here as early as mid-April or mid-May.
The MAGA congressman, the Republican congressman who represents that district, his objection, just so I understand it clearly, and people who are with us, are not to uh, some score of thousands of human beings being imprisoned in a warehouse. His objection is that he doesn't want them to be imprisoned in that warehouse in his district. He'd like the people to
Right.
be imprisoned in warehouses in other districts.
Right. His actual direct quote is, quote, although I'm aligned with the mission of ICE to detain and deport the criminal illegal aliens who have flooded across our border due to Joe Biden's reckless policies, I agree with the community that Social Circle does not have the sufficient resources that this facility would require. That's a direct quote from Representative Mike Collins, who we should mention is running for U.S. Senate here. He's one of 10 Republicans in the primary to run against Jon Ossoff here in Georgia.
When you talk about the contracting, it's been, now let me stipulate that I don't believe a word that any government spokesperson says at the Department of Justice, at the Department of Homeland Security. My personal view is only a fool would. They have no credibility because of the constancy of the lying, but they have represented that Kristi Noem is the signatory on every single contract signed by DHS over $100,000. Normally, if I understand your reporting, the way that this would work is that the Department of Homeland Security would say to the General Services Administration, we have a requirement for a space, and the GSA would then go out and contract to find that space with wherever it may be available. And that GSA is the leasee, not directly the Department of Homeland Security. But in this case, that process, the normal, regular process, is not followed. The Department of Homeland Security has directly contracted for this facility, and we don't know any of the details about the decision making beyond the fact that they paid 5x what the value of the property is.
Right. So that person I talked to with deep knowledge of these transactions within the federal government said that that is protocol. You go through General Services Administration, and each department in the administration has somebody they go to, a client liaison basically, and they help them fulfill that. And there's been a long-standing policy to reduce the footprint of the amount of property that the federal government owns. And they've actually been selling off buildings. And so this person told me that almost always GSA policy says, like, there's kind of a playbook here. And GSA policy says, like, well, we lease. We don't purchase property because that way it's fluid. They don't know how long they might need it. If you take like a natural disaster, I've covered a lot of hurricanes, a lot of wildfires, flooding, you name it, and they will lease these huge spaces for like shelters for people to go to when they're evacuated. And they can do really short-term leases, but he said that they could go up to 20 years for leases. And that's really protocol because you don't know how long you're going to need this, especially with something like this, with these immigration policies. I mean, you spent $128.6 million on this. Well, there's a presidential election coming up in a few years. So he said that's really like one of the main reasons that they go through the leasing process over buying these properties, because it just makes more financial sense. But yes, then that other big red flag that stuck out to this person is that you see the Department of Homeland Security listed on that deed, and not GSA, who really handles most of the federal government's real estate transactions. So that part was very odd too. The city manager also said that he heard that maybe Department of Defense contracts are involved here. So I've been trying to look into that. I haven't found anything this morning, but we're going to look more into that. There's so much at play here. And, it's important to mention, Representative Collins has said, he's worried about it being just here. It's not about the immigration policies. We're getting a mixed bag. I mean, there are certainly people in town who told me they didn't want to go on camera, but they told me they do not agree with any of this. They don't want any of these warehouses to be filled with detainees, with people they're rounding up. And there's also just a lot of misinformation out there. I spoke to a woman yesterday, and everyone, I should say, Steve, everyone I talked to has been just very lovely, very kind. They want to know more information because there's really not a lot of great information coming from the federal government right now. And so they want to know more information. And there's just a big question like, well, you know, I had a woman ask me yesterday, well, why, if they're deporting them, why would they need to lock them up in this facility? And like, why do they need to have that many people in there? And where would they all be coming from? And are these all violent criminals? And these are all questions people have. And so you start to talk about this, and you start to talk about the plans and showing like big groups of people in one space. And people start asking questions about the sanitary conditions and illness. And, you know, we're in rural Georgia out here. We're about an hour outside of Atlanta. The nearest hospitals are both about 20 minutes away from here. And they're rural hospitals. They're small hospitals. So there are a lot of people asking these questions. And while some people are very much concerned about the humanitarian component here and just human rights abuses, then there are other people who say, well, I do agree with these immigration policies, but, you know, not here, not in my backyard. So there is a lot of that. Plus, we should mention just down the road here, I don't know, a little over a half mile, I think. Sorry, the wind is very, very strong today. There's a school, brand new school, first year open. And so a lot of parents are saying, well, why would they put this right next to our brand new elementary school? And what are the kids going to see who ride the buses? What do the bus routes look like? So that's a big question. Also, I mean, semi-trucks are coming and going. Already there's a traffic component here that there's a little bit of an issue with school pickup and drop-off because there are 1,100 kids at that little elementary school down the road. Social Circle's only 5,000 people about, but a lot of kids come in out of district because this town is known for its incredible school system. They want to go here, and they have a brand new school down the road. And so a lot of people are questioning, well, what are these kids going to see driving by this detention facility when there's already a traffic issue? If you talk about 60 to 75 days and there's a sewage issue, you know, we're kind of thinking out loud that we'll probably see some of these, you know, porta potty situations like we saw in Florida. And what kind of vehicles and trucks are going to be coming and going to take care of those and maintain those, you know, among so many other things, just so many questions.
How much resolve is there in the community to stop it from ever opening that you've picked up?
Well, so the city manager said this town voted for Donald Trump with about 73% voted for Donald Trump. It's a very conservative town. And he said that people are united against this. They don't want it to happen. And yet they don't really know what to do. I talked to one gentleman yesterday who said, I mean, what can we do? It's coming no matter what we do. What can we do? And so I think that they're all just asking questions. You know, what can we do? And the city manager just hopes that something can be done. And he noted, you know, that other detention facilities have been stopped. That, you know, senators have stepped in and other people pushback has worked, and that it's been stopped. And so he's wondering, well, why hasn't that worked here yet? And so, you know, we're just going to keep talking about it and digging for information. I did write an email to the DHS Office of Inspector General, and I did ask for clarification if they're looking into any of this, any of the sign-offs or the chain of command here on who approved this, how it was done, if this property was appraised, how they chose the $128.6 million figure. who signed off on it, if there had been any communication with anybody here. And another thing that the city manager discussed with us and that the city released last week when they first finally had a meeting, a telephone call with DHS representatives, is that DHS said that they've done an economic impact study, but nobody here has seen that. And so we're just trying to get a lot more clarity from the federal government about the due diligence here and what's been done ahead of acquiring this, and not just for a small amount of money, $128.6 million.
Has Senators Ossoff or Warnock weighed in on this?
Yeah, they have. They've been very vocal about it. Senator Warnock actually introduced a bill trying to stop these warehouses across the country from being turned into these facilities. There's also a new effort out. Let me pull up my notes here. There's a new effort this morning I read about that Senators Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan are planning to introduce a bill today that would stop DHS from opening any of these detention centers without consulting the local officials, the municipalities and the counties, that they couldn't be able to do this like they did here without contacting anyone. So there are lawmakers kind of working on this, but it's just a matter of if they'll get anywhere, without being the majority in Congress.
It is astonishing reporting, Maritsa. You've done a tremendous job down there. I'd encourage everybody who is with us, who will see this later, to go to the Grounded podcast site on Substack. You can read Maritsa's astonishing reporting. And I'll just close before I let Maritsa go. I have written about this a couple of times over the last 2 years. Auschwitz was delayed in its opening. And the reason it was delayed is that Auschwitz could not get the sewage treatment plan approved by the German water bureaucrat. And that may sound astonishing to people. The SS was not omnipotent. Just like the Department of Homeland Security is not omnipotent. They were part of the government. The government had a regulatory and bureaucratic framework, administration throughout it, just like we do. A German bureaucrat would not stamp the approval for the opening of Auschwitz because the plan by the SS was to dump the waste into the river, and downriver were 5 million Germans whose water supply would have been poisoned. So it is very, very chilling to know that about Auschwitz, and to read your reporting about that. The concerns are about, well, where is the wastewater going to go? Not about the thousands of people who will be locked into a warehouse that was never meant to hold people, let alone prisoners of any type. Astonishing story, tremendous reporting. Thank you, Maritsa Georgiou. And we'll be following this closely at the Save America movement, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that that two things, they never open, but two, 20 years from now, there will never, ever, ever be anybody who has credibility to say they didn't know what was going on, what was happening. And I suspect someday that if this facility does open, one day it will be part of a national park exhibition all over the country, where we go to remember the atrocities that took place behind the walls of the warehouses, where Donald Trump and MAGA, with the support of the people, like who live in Social Circle, Georgia, in the election of 2024, that they voted for this, and here we are, a little bit over a year into Donald Trump's second term. And so, Maritsa, you're reporting. You did this for the Save America movement. You're going to be doing more work. It's just tremendous, tremendous reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, take care, everybody. Maritsa Georgiou from Social Circle, Georgia, where something very, very terrible is afoot. Good afternoon, everybody.